special effective practice sharing session for the South West region. My name's Adam Luke. I head up the school attendance policy and strategy team at DFE, and the purpose of today's session really is to share and celebrate some of the progress made across the region so far on the working together to improve school attendance guidance. I know that everyone is at different points in the journey of implementation. In fact, everyone started at different starting points. So the point of the afternoon really is to learn from your peers and from your colleagues across the region and get their tips and ideas on how they've gone about implementing the guidance as we work towards it becoming statutory from the beginning of the new school year. There's so much good practice going on across the region from, I know some really great work with independent schools in Baines, really positive outcomes of the pilot target and support meetings in Gloucestershire, some excellent work in South Gloucestershire, all different parts of the region, and three very different examples today, all different in their own way, people who've adapted and shaped the guidance to their context, which is the point of it. It sets out a core skeleton of things you're expected to do, but doesn't tell you how to go about doing that, so that you can focus in on the areas that work for your local authority area. And the three examples today have taken it in different directions to suit their needs. I have the pleasure of being joined by Daniel Hamer from Torbay, Kerry Smith from Dorset, and Karen Green from Wiltshire this afternoon. And I hope everyone, wherever you are on their journey or whatever your starting point and context is as a local authority, that you take something from it and you get an idea that you can go away and have a go at. For those of you who are sitting there at the end of the session and you're thinking, I wish there was an LA that was slightly more like mine, we've done similar sessions in other regions of the country, and by the end of the month we'll have done this session or a version of this session in each of the regions. They're all on the DFE YouTube channel, so if you want to have a look at those, there will be some that have a similar context, hopefully, to you in size or in demographic or in starting point indeed. I think that's probably it. In terms of housekeeping, if you could stay on mute, please. There's an opportunity to ask questions of each of the presenters after they've spoken. So if there are things that you want to know a little bit more about, or the things that you wish they'd told you, that's your opportunity. And you can put them in the chat as we go, or you can put your hand up when it gets to that section. Perfect. I'm coming to Dan then first, and to Torbay. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers, thank you. Right, so Torbay is a small local authority, 19,500 students more or less, 43 schools, only one independent that's really small. My starting point is I had a standing joke that my attendance team was called Shirley, because that was my entire attendance team. The political decision was made about 10 years ago when we became a unitary under a single mayor, to divest ourselves of all things that could be traded services, and rather than trade them, expect the private sector to pick that up. So we ended up with a legal enforcement only provision. So at the same time, we do have an unusual number of small and single academy trusts. Almost all of our secondary schools until recently were standalone academies. We now have two in the same academy, so it's hardly a great change, but we're moving towards MATs. We also have three grammar schools, each of which draws 60% of its intake from Devon. So we have a lot of cross-border working, a lot of children who actually don't reside here. And one of our secondaries has got a selective stream, presumably because three grammars just wasn't enough. So we do have an unusually high number of special schools too. When we were part of Devon before we became unitary, a lot of the special schools got built in the Torbay area. So we have three large special schools. So again, when you compare that with only 8 secondaries at all, it's quite a significant proportion. Go to the next slide, please. So just to let you know where we are with data. Data has been a challenge. We've been very lucky, partially because we're so small. All of our schools have signed up to the Wonder system, so View Your Education data has been really useful. Some challenges around it, in that when schools change registration number or trust, or actually in one case just name, the data then doesn't follow the school. So we end up with having to do a little bit of jiggery-pokery on spreadsheets to match it up, but it works. But we've also got fortnightly local data sharing, because one of our requests that we've already put into Wonder is that we can see the coding. We can't see the coding in the downloads from to the LA at the minute. So we're hoping that that will be added to Wonder. Then we can stop the local data sharing, and schools won't have that. We'll have that automated process. We do cross-reference with social care data. Some of it's Power BI, some of it's a very good business intelligence officer who goes into the back office of Liquid Logic. But it does mean we're able to track that data against individual social workers, social work teams, early help responses, and all those other agencies that are involved. So, and then we also look at the underlying data from the fortnightly attendance in England reports, because that does give us the coding. So again, at the minute, we're hodgepodging, but hopefully we'll get to a place where we can do that in a more sustained and stable way. So we do, because of that data sharing, make a lot of multi-agency decisions in early help panel, SEND panel, and medical needs panel. So we are meeting some of that attendance as a support need, doing that first, going through those panel processes. So we can move on, please. So what we're actually doing, we have attendance clinics in local areas, normally based in a school, where schools can come and talk about individual children. Shirley runs them with my inclusion case officer. Again, because it's not normally a single issue, attendance is almost a symptom. We hold attendance forums each term when we invite attendance champions and attendance officers, and sometimes head teachers come along to do that. And those are becoming increasingly kind of action learning sets, where we're presenting case studies and asking schools to share best practice about how they'd address that case study. And we're doing that to try and promote consistency, particularly that annoying consistency where a family's across 2 or 3 schools and gets different responses to a request. We're also including attendance at our designated teacher and DSL forums, and we attend both Torquay primary heads and Torquay secondary heads association meetings. And we're not a standing agenda item, but we're close to. We're pretty much talking in all of those from some element of inclusion. We now have 2 new staff just starting to join us. So they will join us for improvement as improvement officers. So we're going to have Shirley working the schools that provide most challenge or are struggling most with attendance, and then the other 2 will be geographically or trust sensible, we're calling it, so that we're trying to get, again, that geographic consistency, but also consistencies in trusts. We've also removed money from the youth service to create an attendance youth worker post, and that young lady will be working with us soon, and her job is to get children out of their houses and linked into our youth service offer, youth clubs. And we've also got agreement from some of our schools that they're going to be present in the youth club. So we start to do handoff in that trusted adult way, and then move the relationship into schools. We have created an attendance graduated response, working with our EPs and with our SEMH graduated response. So we have a common expectation, almost like a framework locally, where these are the things we think should be universally available. These are the things we think you should be offering for moving towards EBSA. The low attended schools, social care and health are joining us for a team around the school or trust meeting. We're involving, for most of our target setting meetings, we're trying to do them at trust level, with the schools cycling through to hold the trust is a strong word, but basically ensure that the trusts are engaged in this work in meeting their duties in the summary table, because we don't believe there's a point in setting targets and agreeing ways of working with individual schools if that's not then supported by the trust directly. So the target setting meetings are by trust where we can. And the way we're planning on managing them, because we're only just getting off the ground with that as the staff are starting, is we're going to use data to propose cohorts of concern, and then ask the schools to provide narrative around that, and looking at micro cohorts. So looking at FSM, SEN support boys, rather than saying year 8, so trying to narrow it down to really small groups of children that you can do effective work with across a term. Now, obviously with the new guidance, we'll be looking at that again, because it's not necessarily terminally now unless there's a shared concern, as I understand it from a quick scan. But it's going to be that level of work. And also a lot of conversations about how the governors are holding schools to account around this. Not us. It's a governor and trustee job. Ours is to help set the targets and set the pathway with the school. It's theirs to then deliver on that, is our mindset. And next one, please. So to help us with that, we're going to embed our attendance improvement officers in early help panels, because we've yet to have an early help referral that didn't involve some element of non-school attendance. And also to stop that merry-go-round of a school refers to early help, where early help refers back to us. I don't have any resource, so we refer to the school back to early help, but nothing actually improves for the family. So we're going to have those discussions in panel so that we can get decisions from panel rather than emails. We combine the roles of the vulnerable pupils lead and virtual school head as a pilot to try and meet the attendance duties alongside the children with the social work extended duties, alongside the kinship extended duties. So we've got that all through understanding. So virtual school remains separate from vulnerable pupils and attendance, but with a common leadership and trying to keep that consistency and using those virtual school extended duties officers as the glue, if you like, between the two teams. Virtual school extended duties officers are providing training and support to safeguarding staff. We present at DSL forums where parenting programs are now linked to school attendance. So are going to be linked to the attendance contracts and the notifications to improve, or notice to improve. We're promoting EBSA ladders. So a lot of our schools use EBSA ladders, working with DPs. We've got some funding for capita penalty notice portal, so schools can submit penalty notices direct. I think it's us and Northlinks or Links that are doing that at the minute. The idea being they can see live where it is in the system, and also when you get that inevitable evidence doesn't match with the statement and Vicky Berkey, you can go straight backwards and forwards. You're not waiting for the post. We are experiencing a challenge around who's going to lead education supervision orders, but we're working that through our safeguarding partnership. And we do have a fair prioritisation protocol agreed with our local health. So where one agency, it's termed as where an agency is unable to move forward with a child because another agency has yet to complete its diagnostic or initial assessment work, we have an agreement that through panels, not just on a random series of processes, through panels we'll be able to propose children are escalated up waiting lists to get to a place where we have the information we need to be able to make informed decisions. And that's been through our ICB and accepted as a workable programme. So we're just working out the actual detail of that now. So that's where we are. We're very early in the journey in that we've had to use reserves to a point, but the new guidance means we can quite quickly, believe, come off reserves, because we'll be able to retain our penalty notice income to a certain degree, and then we'll put the people on establishment and we'll be able to go from there. But that's Torbay. We don't have the answers yet, but I think we've got a lot of solutions we're trying.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dan, and thanks for a sort of honest, open appraisal of where you started, where you got to, and some of the challenges you met in the meantime. Questions for Dan, either in the chat or with hands. While we're getting those from people, Dan, just a question from me, really, which I suppose is, if you were starting again from where you were starting, what would you have liked to have known that you know now that others might benefit from?
I think part of it for us is around that link to early help and social care. I think we'd have hit the ground on that harder. What we did was hit data quite hard and looked at the staffing we thought we'd need. And I think, although we made very quick inroads with early help, inroads with statutory social care, I think we'd had to push harder and faster. I think that's the one thing that's the challenge for us at the minute.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Question from Jada.
Hi, Dan. Jada here from North Somerset.
Hello,
I'm interested in your youth worker post. Do you currently still have a local authority funded youth service in Torbay? And is that how you were able to kind of flex that?
Well, we had a commissioned youth trust, but we felt it wasn't responding to need in the same way we'd like it to. So what we do is we fund 4 community groups to run youth clubs and detached youth work in areas where there's significant ASB. Then we have a small number of youth workers, but one of those posts was vacant. So we decided one of the best things to do actually was where is the area of need? Well, if it's not ASB and it's not around the exploitation, it's probably around non-school attendance and the risks. So then the DCS made the decision to via that person in, but at the same time we had a reshuffle. So my team now sits in family hubs and that sort of work. So again, it's trying to move everything into that early help. So virtual school and exclusion becomes a bit of a pinnacle. It's that kind of work.
Thank you.
Yeah, more than happy to chat about the penalty notice portal. I didn't catch the name before it dived up and
Sorry,
down
it's
again,
me. It's Andrea from Gloucestershire. I'm just putting the package together to ask for it. But one of the criteria is that I've spoken to somebody that's already using it. So you putting that was just ideal timing.
Yeah, to say we're already using it is pushing it, but we're piloting it. So yeah, more than happy to chat.
Okay. And the other question I had was about the maximum number of schools you've got that you're talking about in a trust targeted support meeting.
That would be it could be as many as 5. That's our biggest trust. But we're likely to divide that into a primary and a secondary meeting to make sure that we're not having a whole day sat staring at each other.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Yeah, and I think the thing on that is the meeting has to cover the school, doesn't it? So if you're meeting as a group, you've still got to have the same amount of time basically, because you're covering that school and then that school and that school. So yeah, it's one way of doing it to save on logistics, but it doesn't actually save in terms of time, I don't think.
No, I don't think so. It's just a challenge for us. Is our multi-academy trust is based in Kent, so building that relationship and building that understanding of the picture in Torbay, I think requires us to meet at a trust level so we can get our own narrative in.
Sensible. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Question from Kerry.
Hi, you briefly touched on how you were going to manage education supervision orders, because people get a bit scared, like in early help and my inclusion team, when we suggest a education supervision order. And I know you said you're in the early stages of talking about it, but I just wondered where you were with your thoughts on managing those.
Well, we're thinking of only doing them where we've got consent, because we don't think they work as an imposition, because if a parent ignores a child in need plan or a notice to improve around attendance, we're not sure they're going to then engage with an ESO. But that our initial thinking is to do it and trial it using the CCWs or named social workers, ideally, as much as anything else, because we want to give their support and direction to the family a bit more clout, rather than bring another adult, another unknown person into the arrangement. So it's that. We're not got too much kickback. What we're trying to do is take the attendance contract information that is now in the new guidance and make that part of our SIN planning and our early help planning. So actually those things that would inform the ESO are naturally part of every child's early help or SIN plan anyway, which then also, when we get to building homes, stable homes built on love, it means when SIN kind of fades into a larger early help offer, we keep that consistency. So that's our thinking at the minute. It's pushing on an open door a little bit, but it's around that consent and getting that from the parent, I think.
That's really helpful, because I've just done a SIN and CP deep sample about attendance. So your idea of putting the contract into there is quite a good one that I could look at. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're piloting that at the minute with 3 severely absent children, because we feel it'd be a good approach to actually have that agreement, which would then survive any removal of consent from a SIN plan. So again, we've got that consistency if we move into a different process.
Perfect. Any final questions for Dan? Well, thank you very much, Dan, again for presenting and sharing your experience, but also for answering people's questions and for everything you're doing in Torbay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We come in next to Kerry then, and to Dorset.
Thank you. So I'm Kerry Smith and I'm the Service Manager for Inclusion in Dorset. So I'm going to talk to you about 4 things. I'll tell you a little bit about our context. I'll talk about how we use our data, then how we work with our schools, and then just a little bit on our legal processes. So we have around 47,000 children and they're in 185 schools, and 15 of those schools are independent schools. It's really difficult for me to put a sort of a number on the amount of staff we have because we don't have central services. Because it's a large geographical area, we are in 6 localities. And each of those localities has a multidisciplinary team. So within those teams, you'll have social care, early help, youth workers, virtual school, SEND, as well as our inclusion teams. So each locality has an inclusion team and each inclusion team has an inclusion team manager. And then across the whole of Dorset, we have 10 inclusion leads sitting underneath those inclusion team managers. So we've got one locality that's got 1 inclusion lead, and then we've got another locality that's got 3. So it depends on the need. But those inclusion leads don't just manage attendance. So they've also got responsibility for EHE and sort of children not in full-time education. So sort of CME, suspensions, that sort of thing. We were really lucky in the fact that we could start implementing the guidance straight away because each one of our state schools had already got an inclusion lead link, and we'd moved to the locality model throughout the pandemic. So we were quite lucky in that respect. Could you have the next slide, please? So as I said, it's a large geographical area and it's predominantly rural, which can present its own challenges. We also have another challenge in that some of our localities have a 2-tier system. So some have primary and secondary schools, whereas other areas have a first, middle and upper school system. We have some really small schools with around 50 pupils in. We've recently sort of moved into the space where we have more academised schools than we have maintained. So at the moment we have 63% of our schools are academies. And again, we don't have large academy national chains down here either. In terms of free school meals, if we looked across Dorset, 20% of our children are eligible, but that can really vary greatly from school and area. So one of our localities is the Chesil locality, and 30% of their children and young people are eligible for free school meals, and that's half in the east where 15% are eligible. We have pockets of coastal deprivation. So we've got some primary schools where over 50% of their cohort will be eligible for free school meals. And we also have pockets of rural deprivation, and some of our primary schools in our rural areas have over 40% of children eligible for free school meals. If I could have the next slide, please. So I'll talk now about how we use our data. So we got all of our schools to sign up to an orchestra system that pulls live data from school information systems. That gets pulled into a dashboard, which we can manipulate in lots of different ways. So we can look at different cohorts, so children on a SIM plan, CP, we can look at SEND status, free school meals, we can look at individual schools, we can drill down into individual data. So we're very data rich. And we report that data at lots of different levels and widely. So there's a weekly report of data goes to Children's Services Leadership Team, and attendance is part of that. We have a monthly education performance board, and attendance is part of that. Then any exceptions from there, be that positive or areas that need strengthening, they then move forward to the next level, which is the Children's Services Performance Board. And again, any exceptions from there then move forward to Dorset Council's overall performance board. We also have a Dorset Education Board, and that is made up of our MAT leaders, it's got our Head Teacher Association representatives, it's got health leaders, it's got our Dorset Carer Council, our directors sit on it. So we've got Director of Place, Director of Education, and we've got our Director of Children's Services and Director of Social Care. So there's a lot of people there, and attendance is a standing item on that agenda. there's a subgroup of that Dorset Education Board, which is the attendance subgroup, and that's made up of school leaders as well as health colleagues and Dorset Council staff as well. We have, in each locality, we have locality attendance networks. They're led by our school improvement lead for each area and our inclusion team manager. So they work in partnership with our schools on those locality attendance network meetings. Could I have the next slide, please? So, as I said, we can analyse our data in lots of different ways. So just on the next 2 slides, I've sort of said what the issues that we found from our data are, and then the actions that we're taking. So out of our 6 localities, Chesil is our highest area of deprivation, and it is also our area with the highest absence rates. So we've set a Chesil challenge up there, and we are working with somebody called Mark Rowland, who's an expert in educational disadvantage in schools, and attendance is a key focus of his work with the schools there. We've also set up an attendance hub with one of our secondary schools in Chesil. We had about 20 children that weren't attending at all, and we noticed that a lot of those were neurodiverse. And the school had put a programme in place, but it was a 6-week programme. And once children got to the end of that 6-week programme, they then just stopped attending again. So we've match funded with the academy chain to set up a programme to integrate those children back in school, because we recognise if you've been out for a long period of time, there's no way you're just going to go and walk into your physics lesson or history lesson. So that attendance hub involves things like forest school, it involves small group tutoring, our specialist teachers who specialise in autism are supporting the school as well. So it's a big programme around that. We also have a comms campaign around attendance, and we focused a lot of our resource in the Chesil locality. We know that our children eligible for free school meals are more likely to be absent. So we've co-produced with our schools and volunteer organisations and health colleagues a Dorset belonging strategy, and that's got a focus on therapeutic thinking, and we're going to be launching that in April. And we'll also be able to use our learning from Chesil and Mark Rowland in our other localities. We know that our children with an EHCP in our secondary mainstream schools have lower attendance, and our Dorset belonging strategy will have a focus on those. We're also developing inclusion hubs, which are resource provisions, SRPs, to support with children attending mainstream schools with an EHCP. If I could have the next slide, please. We can see that transition points cause a dip in attendance. So last summer, our Chesil school improvement leads piloted a summer school and a peer mentoring programme with our 4 secondary schools in that locality. That was amazingly successful, and we're going to be rolling that out across Dorset this summer. We went to Schools Forum a couple of weeks ago to ask that all schools bring their data transfer forward. That they have their school transfer meetings before May half term, and we've developed a standardised format for that. We're looking to have a Dorset moving up day where everyone sort of moves on the same time, and schools would like us to coordinate that with our neighbouring LAs. Our children who are neurodiverse will tend to be absent more, so we're part of an Autism in Schools project with Dorset Para-Care Council, health colleagues as well, and it's a national project, and one of the key aims is to improve attendance for children with autism. And the inclusion hubs that I mentioned earlier have a focus on communication and interaction needs. And then our other area of focus is children with a social worker, and we've just done a second round of dip sampling of our SIN and CP plans, and we do that alongside our virtual school and social care colleagues. It's led by our quality assurance colleagues, so it's part of our overall process. It's not something that sits separately, and that will feed into further CPD for social care colleagues, our locality teams, and also our designated teachers. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of working with schools, for us, it really is a culture piece. Relationships are absolutely key at all levels. We are always trying to engage our MAT leaders positively, and we are starting to see a real shift now on how they're working with us. They're much more positive. I've mentioned our belonging strategy. That's going to be key for us because we need our children to feel like they belong in their schools and their communities. We are system leaders in making sure that we take a strength-based and children-centred approach. And I've mentioned earlier that we want to take a therapeutic thinking approach and relational approach in our belonging strategy. We try and co-produce as much as possible so that it's done with rather than done to. And that was key for both our attendance and belonging strategies. And I think the sort of theme of what we're trying to do comes through in our Dorset communications campaign, which we co-produced with schools. So like the photographs and everything are from our school staff. And I think I've just put a couple of examples there of our messaging, that it is about sort of working together, relationships and belonging. Can I have the next slide, please? So other ways we communicate with schools is our Director of Education has a Director's Education Bulletin. We have our own guidance for promoting attendance. I mentioned earlier that our school improvement team lead termly locality attendance network meetings, and we've had some really good feedback from those. So I've put a couple of quotes there. So things like, it's a fantastic session, it's really inspiring, schools are able to share their ideas, they really like the tone and approach because it's non-judgmental, and it's just a space for everybody to joint problem solve and share ideas. I've mentioned our Dorset Education Board attendance subgroup. So they've worked on the transition work that I mentioned earlier, and they also worked on our communications campaign for us. And they are now focusing on producing a Dorset inclusion toolkit and how we can engage our voluntary sector more and make more use of that. We are always engaging our head teachers, Zenko and governor briefings about attendance. We have a senior EP that is leading on an EBSA project for us, and that includes both school staff and Dorset staff, so we're both using the same strategies and approaches and language. So all of our secondary schools were given the opportunity to attend training on working with parents and how to facilitate parent groups. And there's a joint half-termly supervision session. So again, it's a space for people to joint problem solve any issues that they've come across, and also talk to colleagues who may be further ahead in their EBSA journey. So that's been really useful. And then finally, our Director of Children's Services and Director of Education offer all schools a roundtable discussion around attendance because they recognise it's a real worry space for our schools. And that is where the attendance hub idea came from, was from one of those discussions. Could I have the next slide, please? So each of our localities has £100,000 each, and it came from COVID funding previously, but it's been so successful that we're going to continue it next year. And schools or voluntary sector can bid for some of that money. You can't have all of it for like one school. So you can put in bids for some of it. And we had some bids around attendance. So there was a Chesil Primary School that was already quite successful with a walking bus and had data to show how it had improved their attendance. So they worked with other local primary schools to make that walking bus even bigger. So we got getting more children into school. We used the money for the summer school programme that I spoke about earlier in Chesil. And then our Dorchester Learning Centre is working with the schools in the Dorchester locality on what they're calling a severely absent project, to sort of offer capacity and support to our secondary schools to help engage their children and get them back into mainstream school. Could I have the next slide, please? In terms of our targeted meetings with schools, like I said, we were really lucky in the fact that we already had a link with each school. We've had to build up our links with our independents and AP, but in terms of sort of the state schools, we already had that. So what we've done is develop some practice standards. So it sets out to our inclusion leads what the principles of the meeting are, what we expect them to do before the meeting. So if I cover the next slide. and then what we expect them to do during the meeting, which is the table there, and then what we expect to happen after the meeting. So our next step now is that we need to put together some quality assurance processes around that to make sure that's been implemented correctly, and then that's having the impact. Can I have the next slide, please? And so the last thing is around our legal action. So obviously we're really clear that it's a last resort. When we went to one of the action sharing practices, I think it was last academic year that the DFE organised, I think it was Durham, I think, that presented about their legal panel and a template that they had for that. So that's what we've introduced. So all the localities come together, we've got a paralegal in there, and if there's a social worker involved or SEND provision lead or anything like that, they come around that particular case that we're going to discuss. And they fill in the template before it arrives there. Then any cases where we might be moving forward to court proceedings, we would ask for a need to know to be circulated so that leadership team are aware, because it is a very rare occurrence. And then I think my final slide just shows the template that we adapted that Durham shared at one of those sessions, so that has to be completed. So it just makes us feel confident that all the support has been put in place that needs to be, and that we're not going to make a situation worse if we do move to legal intervention. So that was everything from me.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kerry. So much to digest. Obviously, starting at a very different position to where Torbay was starting, but also taking that step back, thinking, where are we? Where do we need to get to? What can we build on? What can we tweak? Where do we stop and change things? Which came across in that. Questions for Kerry. One from Andrea in Gloucestershire.
Hi, thanks for that, Kerry. Loads of information that I need to go back and have a look at. So I was just asking, are you going to be able to share your templates and things with us? Because that would be really useful.
Yeah, I can drop them into the chat if that's helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great, because there's always, like, you know, good things to steal off other people.
Yeah, well, like I said, I stole Durham's and adapted it for us.
Lovely, thank you.
It's creative building, building upon one another's work. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Vicky, did you want to say something?
Yes, Kerry, could you send them to me and then I can send them round in an email? It might be a bit easier for everybody to have access to it that way. I'm not sure you have access to the chat afterwards. Thank you.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah,
thanks, Vicky. A question from me, Kerry, while we see if there are others in with hands up or in the chat. Well, it's a two-part question really, and it's about geography. So lots of people across the country who have large geographic areas have sort of worried about how you meet the level of need from schools and how you support such a large area. So first of all, if you could say anything about how you found that, and then the second part of that really is you've got such a contrast in some of your areas, Chessel versus the North, comparing Weymouth, the Blandford Forum, and so on and so forth. How did you go about that, and have you got any tips for other people who've got equally sort of diverse and large areas?
So as I said earlier, we were really lucky that at this sort of same time as the working together to improve school attendance guidance came out, we were in the process of moving to a locality model. So even though we've got a big geographical area, we're actually in six areas. So that makes it a lot easier to manage. And then in terms of the different areas, I guess it's just we analyze our data, and then everything that is around that specific area. There might be learning, like with the Mark Rowland work that we're doing, actually that might be helpful to other areas where we've got some deprivation, but it's looking at our data and then thinking about specifically what is going to work with that area, because we can't just do something all across Dorset, because that wouldn't work, because they've got different issues. So like Chessel won't have so much as a transport issue because it's less rural than the North will. So the North is a lot more difficult because that's around transport, and how do you fix that in a rural area? So yeah, it's looking at what issues are specific to that area, and then looking at actions that can address that. But like I said, we were really looking that we were able to work with a locality based model, and then that enables us to build relationships rather than really distant central services.
I see. So
so we're able to build relationships not just with the families but with the schools as well in that area. So it's really community based.
Yeah, I see. So tips for other people: if you haven't got districts, or if you haven't got localities, try and divide your area up and think about where we've got sort of common problems, and then look at what are the issues in those areas. Try and have staff either physically in those areas or working solely on those areas, so that they can draw connections between the professionals and the schools. Perfect. A question from Andrea: have you got any answers to the transport problem with rural areas? If you know the answer to that, Kerry, then you've solved a lot of people's problem.
No, like I said, in Chesil it's a lot easier because it's a smaller area. We'll do some walking buses. Some villages that has actually worked. So perhaps, you know, you've got a young mum that's got several young babies and then trying to get her with a child out to school. So walking bus in a small village might work, but when you then move on to secondary schools, and a secondary school is a long way away, and there's one bus and it's a school bus, and if they miss it then they don't go to school. Yeah, if anybody solved that problem, I'd be more. I'd love to hear from them.
And it isn't just solely a rural problem. Obviously, it's much more difficult in rural areas, bigger distances to carry to cover. But some towns, it's very, very difficult in public transport to cross from one side of the town to the other, and if a pupil's moved to another school, for example. So it's something many people have spoken about in the series. If you do go back and watch some of the other ones, Andrea, people have said what they've tried to do, but there are no perfect answers in it, as you can imagine. It certainly reminds me of growing up and being stood waiting in the snow for the bus, and if it didn't come, then that was a problem. Trying to find a way to get to the nearest town and then on to school and arriving an hour or so late. I remember very well. And not very fondly. Any further questions for Kerry, or shall we move on? Perfect. Thank you again, Kerry, for everything you're doing and for being so open and sharing with everyone. And we're coming, last but not least, to Karen and Wiltshire. Welcome,
Thank you.
Karen.
Thank you very much, Adam. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Green. I'm the manager of the Education Welfare Service based in Wiltshire. So just to share some effective practice with you, it's not really anything that's rocket science. It's just what we do in Wiltshire currently. Things move on and we're constantly evolving what we do. So you know, I'm happy to take advice from people, but equally happy to share what we do currently. So in Wiltshire we have 261 schools, including our independents. My service is quite lucky. We've maintained a traditional education welfare service effectively in Wiltshire over the years, whereas other I know colleagues across the country have had massive changes where education welfare service was dismantled over time. But in Wiltshire we've been very lucky to retain that. I currently have 10.5 full-time equivalent staff. I've got some increase in budget to be able to increase that staffing complement to reflect the growth demand for attendance management. So so that's increasing, but the caveat with that is that those staff also deal with EHE, they also deal with child licensing, and they also do all the CME work. So it's not just solely for attendance. We were fairly up and ready with some of the guidance from September 2022, so we were able to start implementing things like the targeting support meetings straight away. The service is free to all LA maintained schools, and we have a traded service to academies should they wish to subscribe to the service. Every academy receives their targeting support meetings and obviously all the statutory work that we're required to provide. That's as given, but they can trade in and buy casework management, for example, from us if they feel that might be helpful. Not all schools, academy schools, subscribe to the Education Welfare Service. Some have their own in-house attendance services that they use, or indeed trust services that they use instead of the local authority service. Most secondary schools in Wiltshire are academies. We only have 4 currently that are not academies, and one of those is looking to academise imminently. And I suppose for Wiltshire, part of our context is it is a rural area, a bit like Dorset. So, you know, some of the same issues that that Kerry was talking about there around transport. We do have a huge military presence in Wiltshire, which is split across the county, and we have this void in the middle of Wiltshire, which is Salisbury Plain, where there is nothing. So we can't go over it. We have to go round it. It's a bit like going on a bear hunt for that. So that causes problems in itself if we need children to be moving around to different schools and things. Transport is a problem because we have this big area that we have to circumvent. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of how we're using attendance data, we're obviously using the published data and the want data. We do use group call in Wiltshire, so all our schools are signed up to that, and that gives us the daily attendance for all of those schools, and we're able to customize those reports really effectively in there. So when I pull up a pupil level attendance report in group call, I can see immediately whether any of those children are open to social care, whether they've got family key worker, whether they've got SEND support markers or education healthcare plan. I can see whether they're open to our youth justice team or to, I haven't put it on the slide, but open to our Emerald team. So those are the children that have those missing episodes, so risk of exploitation. There is a free school meal marker on there as well, so we can see those children who are eligible for free school meals, anybody who's designated as a young carer, and any child who's part of a service family. So those are the primary markers that we use. We can pull through information about children with English as an additional language, and we can also pull through children who are from GRT communities. In terms of how we deliver our work, we have devised a formula in Wiltshire. So we look at persistent absence for schools. We take the time in numbers of hours that we've got in education welfare, and then we manipulate all of that information based on persistent absenteeism with schools. This is for our maintained schools. And then there's a weighting added for pupils who have the free school meal marker, English as an additional language, and any low prior attainment marker, and that gives us a number of hours essentially which we can give to those schools to be able to support them with managing attendance. So schools with higher persistent absence and in areas where deprivation factors are greater will receive significantly more of our education welfare service time than perhaps as a primary school in a more affluent area. We are required to provide regular updates on attendance to Cabinet. So we have a Children's Select Committee. We have to produce information for the Education Safeguarding Committee. We have a Performance Outcomes Board who we have to report to regularly, and Performance Outcomes Group, which is monthly, and that provides senior leadership and the corporate oversight of attendance management in the county. Next slide, please. So we have produced our attendance strategy. We were a bit behind on this in Wiltshire, so we didn't have this in place as quickly as we should have done. And we're very grateful to Knowsley, who shared their strategy with us and enabled us to use some of their ideas and thoughts around that, because we were very impressed with what they were delivering there. In terms of getting that into place, you know, we had a big consultation process. We spoke with our Safeguarding Vulnerable People partnership. We included our public health colleagues, our NHS colleagues, and commission services such as school health nursing services, which we commission through the local authority, partly with NHS. We spoke with our Wiltshire Learning Alliance and with all our heads forums, and consulted with Wiltshire Parent Carer Council specifically around thoughts and views of families and children with additional need or SEND need. But the strategy is overarching for all Wiltshire services and includes, you know, a number of services who work with children and families, and everybody is expected to work towards this strategy, which underpins our vision for Wiltshire in terms of good attendance and good outcomes for all of our children and young people. Alongside that is a toolkit for professionals, which has lots of information about threshold, for example, stages of interventions, where we would expect cases to go in terms of case management, and also those solid links into our other strategies. So we have a disadvantaged learner strategy, for example, our AP and inclusion strategy. So all of that all ties together really alongside the attendance strategy. And then we have our educational and neglect threshold document, which we are waiting sign off for. So we're still we still haven't got that embedded as well as we would like it to be in Wiltshire, but that's a work in progress for us currently. Next slide, please. So our work with schools, we have got various toolkits of guidance and support documents available, templates, workflow processes. They're all available in the right choice pages, which all schools can access, and also not just the education welfare service or attendance documents, but everything else that links in with that. So all of the stuff around suspension and exclusion, all of the things around EBSA, it's all in that one place that all schools can access, and they've got reams and reams of resources available to them within that those pages in the right choice web-based application. We have developed an improving school attendance programme for school leaders. It's going to be 4 3-hour face-to-face sessions. The first session starts in term 6 of this year. Term 6, sorry, that's Wiltshire has a 6-term year. So after the summer half-term break. So these are the 4 areas we're looking at. So vision and strategy. So it's about asking schools to think about where they are in terms of their attendance currently. What do they need to make any changes? How can we support them to make changes, to give them some ideas about, you know, good practice. There will be a session on effective implementation, about how they're working that within their own school settings. Particularly their processes, their own attendance policies and procedures. So looking at what works for them as a setting. There'll be a session on meeting individual needs, so looking at targeting individual learners, and then a session on measuring impact. And we're delivering that jointly with our school effectiveness service. So that's really about all of our school effective or school improvement partners that are working in schools, also taking those messages into schools to deliver that whole school approach to attendance improvement. We've also got a training programme for governors about their strategic role in improving attendance outcomes. We run those 3 times a year. There are sessions held at different times of the day, so hopefully, you know, that works for most people, so they can at least commit to coming to one of those sessions. But it really sets out the whole of the attendance guidance, talks about their role in leadership of attendance, talks about having those challenging conversations with their school managers, and also gives them some sort of legal advice as well around you know, all of the things that are available in order to support regular attendance for children and young people. And then in addition to that, we do all of our termly head teacher briefings. There's always an element of attendance discussion at those, whether it's just something fairly straightforward about new guidance, or you know, an example of good practice. We deliver workshops regularly at our safeguarding conferences, at any disadvantaged learner networks. All of those sorts of meetings are held, you know, with other colleagues. We will have some input into as well, just to reiterate the whole of the attendance agenda with those colleagues. Next slide, please. So very quickly, our targeting support meeting. So last year we managed to deliver at least 1 targeting support meeting to 92% of our Wiltshire state funded schools, which we were actually really pleased about because we've got quite a large number of schools and it is quite a big commitment. The offer was made to 100% of Wiltshire schools, so including our independent schools. Everybody had that offer. Not everybody took that up. 6 of our independent schools accepted targeting support meetings last year. That's increased this year. I think independent schools are now saying quite loudly that they are also struggling with attendance and finding that a challenge. So they have found, the feedback we're getting this year, particularly from independent schools, is they're finding it really helpful. And in fact, I had one independent school phone up and say, when am I having my meeting, please? You know, so it's really good that that's being embedded with those settings, because they are feeling the pressure themselves now around attendance. And we're delivering those on a mixture of face-to-face. Usually the first TSM of the year will be face-to-face, and then we drop that down to a virtual meeting if schools want that. They're taking about an hour to 2 hours, really. We include the attendance lead for the school. We do invite the governor with attendance lead responsibility as well, but they don't attend for the whole meeting. They'll come and talk about some of the strategic stuff that's going on, so those bits about the demographic, what's affecting the school currently, any sort of training requirements on a wider school basis, policy and process, how they're using their data, and then they'll leave, because obviously we then go into those individual discussions about individual learners and young people, about how we can support with improving or supporting attendance for those young people. So we always have, so that the template that we use for our targeting support meeting has all of that stuff in about demographic, any requirements that they have, things they want to talk about, and then particularly we look at children who are accessing reduced education provision. I was really thrilled to see in the new guidance the stuff around coding for children who are attending part-time provision, because I think that's going to be really helpful for everybody. So we ask schools to particularly look at those children. We look at anybody that's got a social worker or a child looked after, the persistently absent, severely absent pupils, anybody who's got an EHCP. And we also ask schools to think about or to speak with us about the EHE leavers, so we get a better understanding of why children have left their setting. Sometimes we don't always get that from schools, so it's really interesting to have that discussion. Some schools we know in Wiltshire have got much higher numbers than others coming out for EHE, so that's a discussion we want to have with schools at this point, so that we can let them know that we know they've got high numbers coming out, but also to have that a constructive discussion around what might be happening for those learners. We also talk about parenting contracts, the number of penalty notices that those schools have requested. Again, that's going to be subject to change, I think, over the next year or so. So largely a positive experience. I think that most schools have said that they found it helpful, and schools are asking for those meetings, so that's really good. And can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And then there's a little bit about how we're working with our virtual school colleagues. So through the extended duties of the virtual school, we've now agreed that an education welfare officer will be embedded in the virtual school for 1 day a week. That is going to support the virtual schools officers with oversight, almost like a supervision. So they'll be having a 15 to 20 minute meeting every week, each virtual schools officer with their education welfare officer, to talk about any cases where there are concerns, and that will include children who are obviously out of county. So, but just to get that advice around what might be appropriate in terms of challenge, anything about planning going forwards, things about using part-time timetables and all of that sort of stuff. So giving that sort of expert overview, if you like, to those officers. The virtual school is now also having targeting support meetings, so they have specifically asked for that, and that's what we're now delivering to them as well, which they are again finding helpful. We have, or I have, a monthly meeting with the lead for the extended duties of the virtual school. We look at pupils with a social worker where there might be some additional education welfare service input, particularly those with significant persistent absence or severe absence. All ICPCs, so those initial child protection conferences, have an education welfare officer involved in that initial conference. It may be that that is not required going forwards because attendance may not be an issue, but it's just there as that support for social care and schools, really, where pupils are of statutory school age and where there may be some concerns emerging. All social workers have to record educational barriers RAG on any child in need and open CP case. That helps us then to determine whether the social worker feels that there is a problem with education in the first instance, and then we sit and we unpick those to look at you know, how we can remove those barriers. We have a vulnerable pupil attendance panel that meets monthly. We look at really stuck cases. So those are the really high end where attendance hasn't improved, but we've got really entrenched absence, and whatever we've done, including social care, hasn't had any impact on improving attendance. That is so there are senior managers from LA Services that are represented there, from SEND, from social care, from education, from disadvantaged learners team, and from school effectiveness. We all come together to try and plan actions for those children. We also have a monthly children absent from education strategic meeting. So cafe meetings, these are multidisciplinary. They include youth justice, SEND, admissions, placement, AP and inclusion, exclusions and suspensions team. So all of the people that are working quite closely with children who may not be accessing school regularly. So each month each subgroup meets, and each subgroup has a specific focus on moving stuck cases forward. We all bring the cases that are our priority cases for discussion to see whether anybody else needs to take action, and we agree that across the local authority. So everybody goes away with an action to try and move attendance on for those children and young people. We also include a Section 19 discussion as part of that to make sure that we don't have, or whether we do have, an LA responsibility to make provision available. And we also now have 12, they've just started in January, 12 school and family support practitioners in place. They are being supervised through the extended duties of the virtual schools team, but they are there to embed the whole early support assessment process. And that is working very closely with schools to support them to manage ESAs, but also to either prevent step up into social care or to support with that step down process once they're coming out of child in need planning. So they'll step down to a support early support plan there at that point. So really that's just what we've been doing. There's still lots to do, we know that, but I just thought we'd share some of the things that we have been doing, and hopefully you've found it helpful or interesting. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Karen. I certainly did. What a joyous afternoon, and what a lovely way to spend some time listening to so much hard work that's gone in, and the sort of coming to fruition of so much that people have done. I know, as I said at the beginning, that people are at all different positions, and for some people that feels like it's a very long way away. But in fact, any of the examples might feel like they're a very, very, very long way away. But hopefully, as I said before, everybody can take something from at least one of those examples that they think, oh, well, actually, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, or that's something I hadn't tried before. Questions for Karen? I've got one, Karen, while we're waiting to see if there are any, and that is on your traded model. So people panicked a little bit at the beginning when the guidance very first came out, didn't they, that you had to walk away from trading completely and that you couldn't continue to trade. That isn't the case, and the new version of the guidance makes that much clearer. But actually quite a few parts of the country that were trading have continued to trade and have adapted what they trade in a similar way to you, and sort of said, yes, there is a market for this. So I don't know whether you just want to say a little bit about why you decided to keep trading, and if others are thinking about it, what they may think about.
Well, if I'm brutally honest, part of it is around resourcing for the service. So that traded model supports, staffing within my service. So, I think it was it's the model that has always operated in Wiltshire since we were able to offer a traded service. So it was no different for us in that sense. So we've changed very little, but in an ideal world, it would be lovely to be able to say that the whole thing is free to everybody, including the casework. But in recognition of the way that Wiltshire works and other services are traded out across the county, it's not just the education welfare bit, but most of our services are traded out into academies. So that's why Wiltshire have elected to continue with that, really. But I don't think it's had a significant impact. In fact, we've had some schools trading into education welfare that have previously not done so. So I think it's almost had the whole thing around the guidance and some of the stuff that we've put out around that. We're very clear. We've got a very clear offer document which goes out to schools at the beginning of every academic year, which clearly states what they get free from us, all schools, and then what they can have as an enhanced offer if they chose to subscribe in. And some schools have chosen that.
That's useful. Thanks, Karen. And another learning point in there for people, when I'm out and about, people sometimes are a little bit worried about, do schools now expect us to do everything? We can't necessarily do everything. We need them to do what they're expected to do. And being clear, as Karen says at the beginning, this is what we do. This is what we need you to have done beforehand, or this is where our role starts. Setting that out really clearly at the beginning, people have found very helpful in terms of trying to sort of head that off and prevent that issue from happening. Question from Andrea.
Sorry, you can always rely on me, can't you? You were talking about the programme for school leaders on attendance.
Yeah.
Is that a traded programme, or have you got the funding, or where have you got the funding from that? Because that's one of my biggest issues, is I haven't got enough people to do.
So it's partially coming through the disadvantaged learners strategy, and so we're delivering it partly through that, but because it's such a wider issue for a lot of schools, so we're using that through. So some of it will come through the income that we've generated in education welfare through trading, for example, and then we're using some of that to offset some that delivery, because obviously we've got to find venues to deliver that. So
did you target those schools, Karen, or did you just make it open to everybody and anybody?
No, so it will be schools that are targeting. So as I said, the first one is due to run towards the end of the summer term, so we're still in that process at the moment. So the programme is developed, but we're still in the process of identifying who that needs to be. But it will be those schools where we've got concerns that persistent absence is higher than national, and it's not just a one-off, that it's persistently higher than national, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Karen. Question from Julia and Baines.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. Can I just pick your brains a little? And I don't know if you need to perhaps put it in the chat to share it with me, but you mentioned customised reports that you're getting from Group Call. Is that still based on, is that sitting outside of Liquid Logic, or do you not use Liquid Logic anymore?
No, I'm not a techie person, so I'm probably not the best placed person to explain how it all works, but the information comes out of Group Call, and somehow our wizardy people are able to match that across Liquid Logic, so we can pick the markers out from Liquid Logic. So the two reports talk to each other. I don't know how it works.
Okay, so it's not something that we can look at ourselves directly through Group Call. It's your individual IT that's developing
it's not a Group Call generated report.
No, that's fine. So it's similar to
so
what we're doing.
It
Yeah.
sits in Liquid Logic, I think, in one of those back room sort of function
the
reports
warehouse
there, but it pulls through the group call data. I don't know how, but it does. It's a wizardry.
Magic.
But it is. I can talk to you about it a bit more, Julia. I can find out if you want, and I can come back to you on
Lovely. That'd be
no
brilliant.
problem.
Thank you.
Perfect. Question from Kerry.
Hi, Karen. I'm just interested in two things. The first one, you talked about an educational neglect threshold document that you've got waiting to be signed off. I just wondered what that's sort of included and whether that could be shared. And then the second thing was around what sort of things you've got in your toolkit for professionals.
Yeah, okay. So I can share those with if I pass those on to, well, I can't share the threshold document at the moment because that isn't signed off. So, but as soon as it is, I can share that if people would like that shared. But essentially, it's about that interface between social care and that responsibility about you know, where a case needs to step up into social care. So we've got some significant challenge in Wiltshire around you know, historically, where we might have seen, oh, it's just education, we're closing it to social care because it's just an education matter, and that's the bit that we've been working really hard on to move away from. And so there's a piece of work which we've been doing with colleagues in social care and other colleagues across the local authority, just to sort of unpick what that actually looks like. And then we're setting out what that looks like in terms of step up into social care on the basis of educational neglect, because I'm aware that other local authorities have really got that firmly embedded as practice. So that's the place that we need to get to in Wiltshire to be able to. Yeah,
I think you're a bit further forward than us on that, even though you think you're not. So that'd be, if when that's ready, that would be really useful, because that is something that I need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, what was the other bit you asked me about?
Just what sort of things you've got in your toolkit for professionals.
Yeah, so those are flowchart processes, for example. So if we're looking at things around EHE, for example, what needs to happen before a child can be taken off roll, those conversations, those discussions, to make it really clear for everybody, because there is confusion about that quite often. You know, there's lots of rumour and misinformation. We've got some short video short films that we've done for professionals as well, which are part of that, around different elements of, so something around we've got a short video around attendance, we've got one about part-time timetables, we've got one around EHE, we've got one around child licensing and performance, what that means for schools, for example, particularly for social workers who aren't always aware of the child employment regs, for example. So all of those sorts of things which will support understanding of attendance, but also in terms of what for schools as well. So professionals in schools around when they need to think about using an early support assessment, for example, what would be the criteria around that, and then the pathways for supporting attendance, what they can do, what they need to do first before it comes into education welfare as a referral, for example, what the expectations are for all professionals working with young people, and then that, so it works in 4 parts essentially. So it's the universal bit, you know, it's the stuff we all know, escalating up to that vulnerable pupil attendance panel where it's really stuck and where we've tried everything that and nothing's moving on. So it's a really clear pathway through those processes to get it to that point of you know, corporate oversight really at that stage.
Thanks, Karen. Any final questions for Karen? I'm going to ask a question to all 3 of the speakers. 2 of you thought that you were done and you could relax into the background now, but I'm just going to ask before we finish, what your top tip would be, I suppose, to people who are at an earlier stage. We'll come to you first, Kerry, then Dan, then Karen.
I would say to do everything with, so even though it slows everything right down, because you can't just write something and go, right, that's what we're going to do. We're just constantly trying to reach out to all the different levels. So the CEO of MATs, make sure they're in agreement, the directors of MATs, the head teachers, the school leaders for attendance, the SENCOs. So every time we do something, like even the tiniest thing, it's always in co-production and always in agreement. Sometimes it gets frustrating because it really slows everything down, but I think it's well worth the time because it just makes everything clear for everybody. Everybody's owning it. So that would be my tip.
Thanks, Kerry. Dan?
I think for us, it's about tying it in with the EHE, the suspensions, and that whole inclusion picture, because we find if we don't go and find the whole inclusion picture, sometimes schools don't give us it, because they're trying to deal with that and don't really necessarily want to address the school culture often, which is part of it. I mean, one of the things in the new guidance is that schools should be a place children want to attend.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the things we're driving quite hard.
Thanks, Dan. And Karen?
Well, there's so much going on in this space at the moment, isn't there? I think it's like, you know, for me, you can't do it all at once because it feels really overwhelming. So I think, you know, what my approach has been is take a small element of it and get that bit right, and then move on to the next bit. Essentially, that would be my top tip, really, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very good one, Karen. I think they're all excellent, but I think that's a very good one because, as I say, people are facing very different contexts, very different situations, very different starting points, different challenges, different opportunities as well, where pots of money come available or an opportunity to restructure happens or whatever. So it's thinking about, where am I? Where do I need to get to? And then looking for opportunities to do bits of that at a time to build towards it. And some of the people across this series of webinars have managed to do all sorts of amazing things when they really initially first thought there's no way we can do that in the time we've got. And that was through following, as you say, Karen, I'll do that bit first, then see if we can get a little bit further and taking those steps. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, especially obviously to the speakers for sharing with you all, but also for everyone for taking part in the session and asking really great questions. Please do look at some of the others online if you'd like to. Vicky's put a link in the chat to the other videos. Thank you for everything you're doing. I know you were all working flat out before you had lots of new regulations and the new version of the guidance to be working through. Hopefully the idea there is to give them in as much time as we possibly can so that we can work through them. We'll be putting on training opportunities and opportunities for you to ask questions on the bits where you need further clarifications as we get towards the summer. But until then, thank you very much for being with us, and see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for your time.